Welcome to everyone who's here. We're so glad that you were able to make it tonight. My name is Desiree, and I'm the social worker for the Caregiver Program here at UCSF. I'm joined tonight by Margaretta Page, our nurse coordinator for the Caregiver Program, and Mary Destry, our supportive care services coordinator. And tonight we are thrilled to introduce Mary Ann Cook, who comes to us with lots and lots of experience and passion for supporting individuals around loss and grief. Mary Ann has a degree in spiritual direction from the San Francisco Theological Seminary. She's trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction and has worked for many years as a grief counselor supporting bereaved adults and children. Tonight, she's going to be speaking with us about anticipatory grief, and she will share some strategies for coping with this kind of loss as well.
Nice to meet you all. And thank you, Desiree and Margaretta and Mary. I'm so delighted to be asked to be here. It's so great for me to work with people and to share what I know. Because, it's hard to know about all this stuff and to find the resources. So tonight we're going to talk about anticipatory grief, and we're going to go over what it is, how it differs from the grief we experience after someone dies, ways you can cope with it, and also you'll all have a chance to share about your own experiences with each other. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and why I came to this work. I've been a grief counselor for about 15 years, and I really was drawn to the work because of my own personal losses. When I was 24, my father, who was my rock, died of cancer. And 6 months later, my grandmother died. And it was right at the beginning of the AIDS crisis. And so many of my friends were getting sick and dying. And I lost two of my very closest friends to AIDS. And then my very best friend, Susie, died of a brain aneurysm. And it was the night before I was about to throw her a surprise 30th birthday.
Oh, geez.
And I was just overwhelmed and I had no one to talk to. And on the outside, I was okay. I mean, I kept going to work and everything, but on the inside, I was just devastated. And it took a long time, but eventually I found the help and support I needed to be able to heal from the loss. And I fell in love again, and I re-engaged in work, and I ended up creating an absolutely wonderful family. But I always knew I wanted to help people who, like me, were just floundering because of their grief. And so I got the training, and I've been doing the work, and I absolutely love it. I mean, the thing is that loss is a part of life, and grief is something everyone experiences, but we don't talk about it very much in our culture. Most of us don't have the kind of role models and rituals we need to help us. And so we're left to do it on our own. And that's hard, right? But when you're able to be with people who get it, like the people in this group tonight, it really helps. And anticipatory grief is a special kind of grief. It's the grief that comes before a loss. Like when someone you love has a terminal illness, say. Anticipatory grief often includes a lot of the same emotions, like anger and sadness and denial, fear, as other kinds of grief. But it just occurs prior to the actual loss itself. And it doesn't affect everyone the same way. Some people, it really, it's a way to help them prepare for the loss. But for other people, they just really struggle with this prolonged period of mourning. And because most people just associate death, the grief with death, a lot of us who are dealing with things like brain cancer or maybe dementia, we don't even know that what we're experiencing is grief. And other people really can't understand what you're going through. And so you're even less likely to get support from others. And it just keeps going and going and going. And there's no closure because there are no rituals for anticipatory grief. And when our grief isn't acknowledged or understood by other people, it only adds to your grief. And you can end up feeling really isolated and alone. And it's so, it just helps so much to be with other people who really get it. And because you don't have to go through it alone. You could have groups like this. And that's a big part of why we're here tonight. I do want, though, to share whatever I can about anticipatory grief that may help. So I want to talk about just how anticipatory grief is similar and then also different from other kinds of grief. So what I want to do is just, first of all, just talk about how I define grief in general. So Desiree, if you could do the, bring up slide 2. This is how I define grief. It's the normal, healthy reaction that people have to significant losses. It's just what humans naturally do when someone or something that they care about is gone. I mean, it's normal, it's healthy, and we experience grief with any significant loss. I mean, loss of a job, of, a community, of, health, whatever. So it's not just death or death associated. I also want to say that grief is not just feeling sad. That's one aspect of it, but it affects everything about you. It affects your ability to think. It affects your body. It affects your emotions, and it affects your relationship with others. I mean, in short, your whole identity. And so you may be having reactions right now that you don't associate with grief. But keeping in mind that grief is not just something that happens to people who dies. When someone you care about is diagnosed with brain cancer or Parkinson's, you have significant losses from the moment of the diagnosis. Every change in their condition is another loss. And it's sometimes referred to as ambiguous loss, because sometimes the losses are subtle and they're just kind of woven into the fabric of your life, and so you don't really identify them. But I believe that it's important to identify each of the separate losses and mourn them, because otherwise they just sort of add up and become this big mush. And it's hard to deal with them all. And the losses can take many, many forms. I mean, the most obvious are the ongoing losses of cognitive ability, and of course that's devastating to you and your loved ones. But there are other types of losses, and I'll let you talk about this in a minute, but just here are a few that I just thought of top of my head. Desiree, can you show the next slide? Yeah, I mean, things like the loss of your future together. I mean, all of the plans and the dreams and the hopes that you had for this future you thought you'd have with your child or your spouse or your parents, hanging out with them they may not ever happen. Sometimes it can be as helpful as it can be to have some help in your home. There's a loss of privacy there. And sometimes it's hard to give up the care for your loved one to somebody else. Sometimes someone needs to move into a care facility, and that really changes your relationship with them, the nature of that, which can be very hard. And then all of the things that go into the end of life care, where you bring in palliative care and all the stages in the end of life stages in the dying process itself. So again, there's so many steps along the way. Loss of speech or vision or whatever it is. And each of them have a right to be mourned. And then there's something else that people don't think about very much when they're in the stages that most of you are in, which is the loss of your role as a caretaker. because you may become so engrossed in your role as a caregiver that it becomes your identity. And so once those responsibilities are over, it may take you a while to let go of that identity and discover who you are again. Okay, I'm going to take some time just to talk about the grief process, because it's, as I said, it's not just feeling sad, it's a whole big process. Because I think it helps to know kind of what to expect and to understand what you're going through. I mean, you know a lot about what your care partner is going through, but what's happening for you? So first of all, grief is not a one size fits all kind of thing. Each of us is on our own timetable. Each of us has our own response to grief. But even though every loss is unique, there's some similarities and some basics that would probably be just helpful for you to know. So Desiree, if you could share slide 4. First of all, there's no right way to grieve. I mean, when you're saying, oh, I shouldn't be crying, or you're saying, oh, I shouldn't feel resentful of, that my life is being so affected. Whatever it is, every one of us grieves every single loss we have differently, because we're all unique people, and our relationship to whatever it is, not just your care partner, but all the aspects of your life, your plans, the sailing, whatever it is, you have your own relationship with that. And each of these incremental losses that you're experiencing are going to affect you differently. And it's hard to predict how you're going to react. So it's just important to remember, no one has the right to tell you how or when to grieve. And you're really the expert on your own grief. And as I said, grief is not just feeling sad. In fact, one of the main characteristics of grief is your feelings are just all over the map, and they're complicated. And you may feel sadness and relief and anger and resentment all in the same day, or sometimes kind of all mushed together. And that bittersweet thing that can happen when just in a moment of joy, you think about what's probably down the pike. And it adds this element of sadness to that moment. And so often the grief or the emotions you feel are very complicated. Sometimes you'll laugh at weird moments, maybe seemingly inappropriate moments. And sometimes you're just going to feel numb. And that's sometimes welcome, and it's okay. The next two are really more about what happens after the death, but since all of us are going to have someone we love pass away at some point, it's probably, I just want to mention these two things. First of all, there is no predictable timetable for grief. And people will often tell you, oh, it's time to move on after a year or 6 months or even weeks sometimes. I often, as a grief counselor, will have clients come in and say, okay, so how long is this going to take? Because I have this thing planned. It's like, oh, honey, no, it just takes as long as it takes. And sometimes you will be, it'll be kind of fading away, and then it'll just come roaring back when there's something like an anniversary that comes up or a holiday. So people who are like you all are in that sort of anticipatory grief experience are in some ways, you are pre-grieving. So all these things that are true about any grief process, you're experiencing to some degree. And it can be a time for you to sort of prepare emotionally for the loss. You may have a chance to resolve some issues, to it may bring you closer in some ways. And so all of that may ease and sometimes even shorten the grieving process once your loved one does die, but not always. But that can happen. The other thing that I just want to say right now is grief does not have predictable stages. The whole concept that some people have of the stages of grief, I mean, yes, it's true that most people will feel anger and denial and bargaining and all those stages, but they won't happen in any particular order, and you won't like finish one and check it off the list and move to the next. But what I do know is that eventually your mourning process will stop being so front and center in your lives, and the pain will not be as intense. I mean, of course, we're all changed by loss. You've already been irrevocably changed. And your life is different now, and it will be different going forward. But life after loss can often, usually, be rich and fulfilling and full of love and joy. And I've seen hundreds of people, and I promise you this is true. So I know without asking that you're all in a lot of stress right now. And I just want to talk about grief and stress, because grief is basically just another form of stress. And so all the things that they've done research and we know about how stress affects you are also true with grief. And remember, stress is not a bad thing. I mean, stress is how we meet a deadline, how I give a presentation, or like how you escape from a burning building, right? But the way it's supposed to work is that once the danger is over, you calm down. But sometimes the source of the stress is ongoing. And so then the stress becomes chronic, and that's not good. And anticipatory grief is one of those ongoing stresses. The grief affects every single part of who you are. It affects you mentally and emotionally and physically and spiritually and psychologically. And I want to just briefly go into a little bit about all those things. Like all stress, grief affects your ability to think clearly, because the executive part of your brain, when you're under stress, just isn't functioning as well. So you may have trouble remembering things and making decisions and planning. And when you're now in charge of everything, which most of you are to some degree, that's really hard. So it's important that you try to take on as little extraneous stuff as you possibly can. You ask and get lots of help, and you rely on things like calendar alerts and Post-its with to-do lists on it, and any way you can help yourself, those crutches to just help you keep track of things. Your emotions will be all over the map and probably more intense. And your feelings may surprise you, and sometimes other people may not approve of them. But while we do have a good amount of degree of control over how we handle our emotions, no one can control the way they feel. So it's really important that you don't ever judge your feelings as being bad or inappropriate. And all this emotional stuff happening right now may change the way you relate to other people and the things you feel like doing. I mean, it's important not to get too isolated, but grieving is deep internal work, and it's exhausting. And you already have so much on your plate. So you may not feel like being as social as you used to be, and that's okay. But be sure and reach out to someone you can trust when you feel the need to share. Because human beings are social animals, and none of us can do the kind of thing you're doing alone. And you need to get your feelings out in some way. You know, stuffing your emotions always backfires, because then they come out these squirrely ways that tend to make a mess. You know, you may find yourself so tired and so overwhelmed, you feel like screaming at your care partner. And sometimes you may actually do it. And so the more you can vent to someone else, like a close friend or a counselor, and have outlets for all that energy, like exercise or a punching bag or pillow, the easier it's going to be to keep from doing things you regret. That said, none of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. We all explode in anger or break down in sobs or say unkind things at some point. And that is completely normal and totally forgivable. Now, when we are stressed out by grief, our whole system is on high alert all the time. And that increases your blood pressure, disrupts your sleep, can cause digestive issues and all that sort of thing. And you need to make sure you take good care of yourself by going to the doctor and, making sure your blood pressure is kept under control and things like that. See, there's this nerve in your body. It's called your vagus nerve. And it's the nerve that regulates your nervous system. And so it tells your body to relax when the danger's gone. But because your grief is ongoing, your vagus nerve continually perceives danger. And so you never relax. But here's a trick for you. One of the most effective ways to counteract stress is as simple as this. It's deep breathing, like in yoga or meditation. The simple act of taking in a long, deep breath sends a signal to your vagus nerve that it can stop sending these danger signals to the rest of your body. I mean, it doesn't solve the problem for good, but it does allow your body a chance to rest for a while. So if you can find ways to work deep breathing into your daily routine, you're going to feel a lot better. Okay. Now, sometimes when people are grieving, the way that they relate to their spiritual life can change. Some people really lean hard into their faith, rely more on it than ever. But others may feel abandoned by God and lose their faith. And then some people who've been skeptical of spiritual stuff all their life may suddenly take up spiritual practices like meditation or something to help them get through. So again, just reach out for support if you need it, and take care of yourself that way. And finally, and this is probably the most complicated, your image of yourself may change. Because so much of our identity comes from our relationships, our jobs, our families, our social groups. When the nature of those relationships changes, our identity changes. And as I said, that starts really from the moment of diagnosis. You and your care partner, you also lose a part of yourself. You also lose the plans for the future. You also lose so much. And you're both in this kind of limbo where you're not who you used to be. You'll never be that again, but you don't really know what the new version of yourself will be yet. And that can be really disconcerting. So what are ways we can cope? And you've just shared some of the ways. But there's a lot of research that's fairly recent about resilience. And resilience is basically just how do you cope when life is hard, right? And some people struggle with that more than others. And so they did research, and it turns out that there are 4 qualities that people who seem to handle stress well have in common. And all 4 of them can be developed by anyone. So the things that people the way to increase your resilience, I guess, and cope with the stress of all that you're going through is having a strong social network, having structure in your life, having a sense of meaning and purpose, and cultivating positive experiences. And so it's a really good idea for you to consciously work on making sure that these 4 things are as strong as they can be for you. For instance, you can join support groups like this one for a social network. You can try to keep your routines as consistent as possible. Now, I mean, like, obviously, as caregivers, your life has a lot of meaning and purpose, but it's important to recognize there is so much more to you than just that. But I really want to focus on this last one, the cultivating positive experiences, because sometimes you get so lost, as we were just talking about, in caring for your care partner, and you feel like, I can't possibly take time for myself. But there's nothing wrong with spending time focused on something really positive for a while. You'll be happier and you will be a better caretaker. All right, see, I like to think of it as a resiliency bank account, and you fill it up with positive experiences. And then to cope with the stress, you have to keep withdrawing from that reserve to cope. Well, if you keep withdrawing, it is so easy to become emotionally bankrupt. And so you need to find ways to take care of yourself so that you can deposit back into your resiliency bank account so you won't burn out. Okay? So, and I'm not just talking about like eating nutritious food and getting plenty of rest and exercise and stuff. I mean, those things are really important. I am talking about things that make you feel good, that you really enjoy, that feed your spirit. And you know what those things are for you. And maybe it's going for a walk in nature. Maybe it's curling up on the couch with a good book or a movie. It doesn't matter as long as it makes you feel really good. Okay? And that's usually the first thing that goes when you're under a lot of stress as a caretaker. You feel like you don't have time for it. You feel like it's self-indulgent. But I promise you, if you don't take breaks, you're going to be drained and overwhelmed, and you'll probably start to get resentful. So you need to identify a few doable, practical things that you can do purely for yourself every week. And then make a calendar alert for it and actually stick to it. I mean, the thing is that loss can be a catalyst for change and for growth and becoming wiser and more compassionate. But it's so challenging to face it. You don't want to feel bad. You want to keep positive energy. You feel like it's your responsibility to keep positive energy for the whole family and yourself. And that's too much. You need to take care of yourself. And sometimes that means being sad. Because the thing is, if you shut off the painful experiences like anger, like sadness, like fear, you also, to the same degree, just the way it works, is you close off the positive things like the love and the joy and the pleasure. And the more you shut it off, the tighter you get. And eventually, you don't feel anything. You're like this zombie just going through the motions. And you lose out on anything good in your life for this precious time you have left. So if you give yourself permission to feel all of your feelings, the good and the bad, to cry when you need to cry, then I promise you, you can handle it. You will not go spiraling down into the depths of hell. You will be okay. It's just like because I mean, see, human beings have been doing this since we were cavemen, right? We know how to do this. It's like when you cut yourself, without even thinking, without telling it to do that, it starts to bleed. And then the bleeding stops and it forms a scab. and then eventually the scab falls off, and new skin has grown underneath that. Well, grief is a lot like that. If you let yourself go through the process, if you don't try to stuff it, yes, you will hurt. You will feel the wound deeply. But if you don't fight it, you will get through it. And you're often stronger and wiser. And you always, always, always have a greater capacity for love. I want to just guide you through a self-compassion exercise. Some of you may have done it in other groups before. That's okay, because you can't get too much self-compassion. You can tell I'm pretty passionate about that. You can find this, and along with a lot of other great suggestions, on Kristen Neff's website. Is called selfcompassion.org. She must have been early on in the game to get such a perfect website. So it's easy to remember, and you might want to just check it out. But this is just a very short, simple self-compassion exercise that you can do at home on your own anytime you're feeling overwhelmed, totally stressed out, isolated, lonely, sad, whatever. Okay, so first what I'd like you all to do is just really get comfortable as much as you can, like in your car or wherever you are. And you can close your eyes and take a few deep breaths, just long, slow, deep breaths. And then really allow the chair that you're sitting on to support you. Just let your body sink into it as much as you can. And, there's going to be some resistance, those places that are tight and, whatever. But just as much as you can, relax into it and close your eyes. Okay. Now then, I want you to think of something going on in your life right now that's hard. I mean, not overwhelming, just sort of everyday level of hardness. Okay? And take time to really get in touch with it. And particularly noticing how it affects your body. When you drop down into that feeling, does your breath change? Do you feel any sensations like tightness in your chest, maybe, or heaviness in your shoulders, catch in your throat? Just notice what's going on in your body. And then, in your mind, say something that just acknowledges how you're feeling. I mean, just the simplest words. It may be something like, this is so hard. And just really let that sink in. Okay, now then, what I want you to do is imagine how you're not alone in this, that humans all over the place are also suffering. And say something in your mind again that acknowledges that suffering is just a part of everyone's human condition. Maybe something like, other people are feeling exactly the way I'm feeling right now, all over the world. And just really imagine them. Imagine what situation they're in with their spouse or their child, their loved one. And just really letting that sink in. And then we're going to just give ourselves some love. So place your hands over your heart and then allow warm feelings to flow through your hands into your heart, really feeling that love and tenderness, just as tender as you would ever treat a little kid or someone you loved more than life itself. Just the sweetness of that. And let it flow through your body all the way down to your feet. Just really breathe into that. And then say to yourself some phrase of comfort like, You're not alone. It's okay. You're going to be all right. And again, just notice how that makes you feel. And you can say it to yourself a few times. It's okay. It's going to be okay. And then when you're ready, take another deep breath. You can open your eyes and just kind of take a look around the room that you're in and just take it in. And come back to where you were. If you think about it, life has so many stages and big things happen that change you forever, like having a child, falling in love, leaving home and becoming an adult. I mean, there are so many big changes that we all go through. This is one of them. And it's a particularly, for all of you, a really rough one. But you will have life after this. And honestly, I have worked with hundreds of people, and through the most gruesome things that you think, God, nobody could get over that. And it's like you get over it. You change, you evolve. But so often, you come out with so much richness, and the love that you shared and that you had and the life and the memories and all that just come flooding back, and they become what you remember, not the last 18 months or whatever it's been.
So Mary Ann, thank you so much for tonight. And I just want to extend a huge thank you to all of our caregivers for your time and your participation and your attention tonight. Really grateful that you all could join us this evening.